Jeffrey Dahmer murders. First murder 1978. Dahmer killed 18-year-old hitchhiker Steven Hicks in Ohio shortly after graduating high school. Dormancy period. He did not kill again until 1987, during which time he served in the U.S. Army before being discharged for alcoholism. Later murders 1987 to 1991. After moving to Wisconsin, he resumed his spree, luring victims primarily from gay bars to his grandmother's house and later his Oxford Apartments residence. Notable victims: Konarak Sinthasompone. In May 1991, he escaped Dahmer's apartment but was returned to him by police officers who dismissed the situation as a domestic dispute. Anthony Hughes, a deaf, mute man murdered in May 1991. Evidence: Dahmer was arrested on July 22, 1991, after Tracy Edwards escaped and led police back to the apartment. Officers discovered 4 human heads and 7 skulls, 2 human hearts and other organs in the refrigerator and freezer, a 57-gallon drum containing 3 decomposing torsos in acid, over 70 Polaroid photographs of victims in various stages of dismemberment. Conviction: Dahmer pleaded guilty by reason of insanity, but a jury found him legally sane. In 1992, he was sentenced to 16 life terms, 15 in Wisconsin and 1 in Ohio. Death: on November 28, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death with a metal bar by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institution. (1978) June 18, Stephen Mark Hicks, 18. Last seen hitchhiking to a rock concert in Chippewa Lake Park in Bath, Ohio. By Dahmer's admission, Hicks caught his attention because he was bare-chested. Dahmer bludgeoned him with a dumbbell and strangled him to death with this instrument before he dismembered the corpse. He then pulverized Hicks's bones with a hammer and scattered them in woodland behind the Dahmer family home. 1987. November 20. Stephen Walter Tuomi, 25. Killed in a rented room at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee. Dahmer claimed to have no memory of murdering Tuomi, yet stated he must have battered him to death in a drunken stupor. His body was dismembered in the basement of Dahmer's grandmother's house and the remains discarded in the trash. No remains were ever found. 1988. January 16. James Edward Dockstader, 14. Dahmer met him outside a gay bar in Wisconsin and lured him to West Allis on the pretext of paying him $50 to pose for nude pictures. Dahmer strangled Dockstader and kept his body in the basement for a week before dismembering him and discarding the remains in the trash. March 24. Richard Guerrero, 22. Drugged and strangled in Dahmer's bedroom at West Allis. Dahmer dismembered Guerrero's corpse in the basement, dissolved the flesh in acid and disposed of the bones in the trash. He bleached and retained the skull for several months before disposing of it. No remains were ever found. 1989. March 25. Anthony Lee Sears, 24. Sears was the last victim whom Dahmer drugged and strangled at his grandmother's residence. He was also the first victim from whom Dahmer permanently retained any body parts. His preserved skull and genitals were found in a filing cabinet at 924 North 25th Street following Dahmer's arrest in 1991. May 20. Raymond Lamont Smith, also known as Ricky Beeks, 32. The first victim to be killed at Dahmer's North 25th Street apartment. Smith was a male sex worker whom Dahmer encountered at a tavern. Dahmer gave Smith a drink laced with sleeping pills, then strangled him on his kitchen floor. His skull was spray-painted and retained. June 14, Edward Warren Smith, 27 356, a known acquaintance of Dahmer who was last seen in his company at a party. 357 Dahmer acidified Smith's skeleton. His skull was destroyed unintentionally when placed in the oven in an effort to remove moisture. No remains were ever found. September 2, Ernest Marquez Miller, 22. Miller was a dance student whom Dahmer encountered outside a bookstore. According to Dahmer, he was especially attracted to Miller's physique. He was killed by having his carotid artery severed before being dismembered in the bathtub, with Dahmer storing his entire skeleton in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet and his heart, liver, biceps, and portions of his thighs in the freezer for later consumption. September 24, David Courtney Thomas, 22. Encountered Dahmer near the Grand Avenue Mall. He was lured to Dahmer's apartment on the promise of money for posing nude. Once a laced drink had rendered Thomas unconscious, Dahmer decided he wasn't my type. Nonetheless, Dahmer strangled Thomas, taking Polaroid photos of the dismemberment process. No remains were ever found. 1991. February 18, Curtis Durrell Strotter, 17. Approached by Dahmer as he waited at a bus stop near Marquette University. Dahmer lured Strotter to his apartment, where he drugged, handcuffed, and strangled him before dismembering his body in the bathtub. He retained Strotter's skull, hands, and genitals. April 7, Errol Lindsay, 19. The first victim upon whom Dahmer practiced what he later described to investigators as his drilling technique, a procedure in which he drilled holes into the victim's skull, through which he injected hydrochloric acid into the brain. According to Dahmer, Lindsay awoke after this practice, after which he was again rendered unconscious with a drink laced with sedatives, then strangled to death. Dahmer flayed Lindsay's body and retained the skin for several weeks. His skull was found following Dahmer's arrest. May 24, Tony Anthony Hughes, 31. Hughes was lured by Dahmer to his apartment upon the promise of posing nude for photographs. As Hughes was deaf, he and Dahmer communicated using handwritten notes. The injection of hydrochloric acid into Hughes's skull proved fatal. His body was left on Dahmer's bedroom floor for 3 days before being dismembered, with Dahmer photographing the dismemberment process. His skull was retained and identified from dental records. May 27, Konarak Sinthasampone, 14. The younger brother of the boy Dahmer had molested in 1988. Dahmer drugged Sinthasampone and injected hydrochloric acid into his brain before leaving him unattended as he left the apartment to purchase beer. When he returned, he discovered Sinthasampone naked and disoriented in the street, with 3 distressed young women attempting to assist him. When police arrived, Dahmer persuaded them he and Sinthasampone were lovers and that Sinthasampone was simply intoxicated. When police left Sinthasampone with Dahmer in his apartment, Dahmer again injected hydrochloric acid into Synthasompone's brain, and this proved fatal. He kept Synthasompone's head in the freezer and dismembered his body. June 30th, Matt Cleveland Turner, 20. On June 30th, Dahmer attended the Chicago Pride Parade. At a bus stop, he encountered a 20-year-old named Matt Turner and persuaded him to accompany him to Milwaukee to pose for a photo shoot. Turner was drugged, strangled, and then dismembered in the bathtub. His head and internal organs were put in the freezer and his torso subsequently placed in the 57-gallon drum Dahmer purchased on July 12. July 5th, Jeremiah Benjamin Weinberger, 23. Dahmer met him at a gay bar in Chicago and persuaded him to accompany him to Milwaukee for the weekend. Dahmer drilled through Weinberger's skull and injected boiling water into the cavity. He later recalled Weinberger's death to be exceptional, as he was the only victim who died with his eyes open. He kept Weinberger's decapitated body in the bathtub for a week before dismembered. His torso was placed in the 57-gallon drum. July 15th. Oliver Joseph Lacey, 24. A bodybuilding enthusiast whom Dahmer enticed to his apartment with the promise of money for posing for photographs. Lacey was drugged and strangled with a leather strap before being decapitated, with his head and heart being placed in the refrigerator. His skeleton was retained to adorn one side of the private shrine of skulls and skeletons Dahmer was in the process of creating when arrested 1 week late. July 19th, Joseph Arthur Bradehoft, 25. Dahmer's last victim. Bradehoft was a father of 3 children from Minnesota who was looking for work in Milwaukee at the time of his murder. Dahmer left Bradehoft's body on his bed for 2 days before decapitating his corpse. His severed head was placed in the refrigerator and his torso within the 57-gallon drum.